And we're back here on another episode of the Zero Empty Spaces podcast, episode 34, with Boca Raton Innovation Campus resident artist Erika Adickman, here from her beautiful studio at the Boca Raton Innovation Campus. If you didn't know about Zero Empty Spaces, we started an initiative, myself, Evan Snow, and my business partner, Mr. Andrew Martineau, as arts advocates and community builders to activate vacant commercial real estate spaces to create working artist studios so artists like her can have space to create and collaborate affordably outside of their homes. Creates a bunch of benefits and win-win-win scenarios for the community. To find out more, you can log on to www.zeroemptyspaces.com. But the point of the podcast is to tell you the stories about the talented artists like her that make the program what it is. So without much further ado, Miss Talented Artist, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in the arts at a high level here?
Oh my gosh, how I got started in the arts. I'm gonna be totally honest that I don't think I'm alone in this reaction, but I think there are a lot of people who, from the outside, are called or referred to as artists who still have a hard time wrapping their heads around that identity. Because, and this is probably stuff we'll talk a lot about in this episode, but I think that we have this idea in our heads of what art really is, who gets to be called an artist, what makes something good enough to be art, and I also think that because of the, I almost want to say pedestal, but then of course some art is literally put on pedestals, but because of the pedestal and the reverence we have for some of the greatest works, that there are people out there who probably are deeply inherently creative who don't explore that because they were told at some point they weren't good, they never sat down with it, and they never unlocked that inner creativity. So for me, my journey into living a creative life, which is where I feel really comfortable with, if you were to ask 5 people who know me from various professional or personal parts of my life and said, what's one word to describe Erika? I think that almost all of them would say creative. And that doesn't mean that I feel creative every day, and it doesn't mean it doesn't come and go in waves. But I think the first time that I really began down the path that has led me here was at 24 years old. I don't know how or why, but I got a copy of the book The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that book, it is a 12-week program. Some people actually do it in a group setting, and they go through this workbook with all these activities week after week. And it's this really gentle way to get back in touch with the inner artist, or even, some would say the inner child, and to really lower the stakes of how to really find your own unique creative or artistic voice. And it doesn't necessarily mean paint on paper. I have explored various artistic mediums. This is just the latest iteration, what you see behind me. But yeah, that was the beginning of it. Reading that book and going through that book is when I first started doing these, what first started to come out of me, and what continues to come out of me is very childlike looking art. It is not because that was a really deliberate style. It's because that's what I know how to do. That's what I know how to do. I didn't do really well at art in elementary school. I didn't take art classes in high school. I went to an arts university, but I went for film and television. So, yeah.
Which has influenced your creativity. Can you walk us through a little bit of your creative journey in going to film school and where that took you and how that might have influenced your path along the way to this point?
Sure. I was a child of the 80s and 90s and really loved TV, and really fell in love with pop culture. What led me to go to film school wasn't, there were some people that I was in school with who were always seen with a camera in their hand. They were driven to either document their lives, or they were telling stories, or they were directing. I was going. I was going because I was like, this seems super fun. I love watching movie and TV, and I would love to just connect with other people who are as passionate or excited or like get what quotes or references I'm talking about. And I also didn't want to take a science or math class, so I was like, cool, I would like to go there. And I got there, and it turned out that like nobody wanted to sit around and quote like John Hughes movies. People were into things that I hadn't even heard of yet. So it was really like, I think in a lot of ways when you go to college, like you're getting to interact with people who have different backgrounds and perspectives. And so yeah, that was part of how I ended up there. Actually, when I first started school, I thought I wanted to be a documentarian because I loved documentaries. I love storytelling. I'm a very curious person.
For those that are curious, what school was this?
Oh, I went to NYU. Hi.
Proud
proud
alumni. It's okay.
No, I mean like, go Violets, whatever. But I I thought I wanted to make documentaries, and then after interning at a documentary film company, I was like, oh, it's a very long, dedicated process, and I don't have that kind of patience.
I feel like arduous.
I mean, it's painstaking.
Yeah.
It's I worked at my first ever internship in college was at a documentary film company that at the time was called Moxie Firecracker, and some of the films that they were working on, these two women, like, I mean, they didn't come out for years. These, like, war rooms that didn't come out for years after I left, so you really have to, be committed. So that led me into interning in television and all different aspects. And after a year out of school, I felt like I was drawn to LA. Never thought that I would want to go there, but I also was like very much fleeing New York City winter as somebody who was born and raised in South Florida. And so I ended up landing a job, very fortunately, as like a showrunner's assistant on like, one of the OG, TV production lots. It was very much still in the like old vein of how TV was run. This was back in like 2005. It was a multi-camera show taken for like a live audience, which was like just a really unique experience. And right around that time, in my first year in LA, this other entity like started to like be birthed, which would ultimately continue to shape and impact this industry.
Is that the entity called YouTube?
100%. YouTube, and then also around this time was like the video iPod.
Correct.
Came out, which if you've never, just a sidebar, there's a really good, there's a great podcast about The Office, and they talk about how the video iPod and iTunes like is part of how that show was able to get beyond a second season, like that they were not getting a huge audience we could even imagine. Correct. So those things, like those outside forces, I could just sense. Like one of the things that I think, in addition to my fascination with pop culture and what is going on in the zeitgeist, what is going on, like what are people thinking about, what trends are happening, what is going on in the collective, is something that will always fascinate me. And what I could sense was that here was this industry that had a very specific like way of existing, where there was a way of like, if you started out as a writer's PA and then you became a script, you became a writer's assistant and then a script coordinator, and then maybe you get a script, and there's all these steps. And
in the television
specifically, in a lot of ways, that's a lot of times how people would, if they wanted to be a TV writer, for example. And suddenly there's this place where anybody who has content and creative ideas can just put it out into the ether and connect with other people and ultimately build an audience. Remember, there's no real Facebook like it is now. There's no Twitter. There's no Instagram. And so those two things together the artist's way and this thing called YouTube, and then being a showrunner's assistant for someone who, you know, was really self-sufficient. She didn't need a ton of, like, you know, she's really had, you know, didn't, I would almost use the word, she wasn't very high maintenance, whatever. Like, you know, she was just super, super competent and easygoing, and I had free time while I was at my desk, and one day I had, like, this digital camera. They had a computer there with iMovie on it, and I was like, oh, I wonder what would happen. I wonder what would happen if I just took these crayons that are here on my desk, because the writers, all their children come in on Fridays for lunch. I wonder if I just colored and took pictures of this and I strung this together. Like, I remember how to do, like, some of this stuff from my editing class at film school, and then I just kind of put it online. And I was like, that was fun. I wonder what would happen if I did it to a song that had, you know, all of these, like, lyrics, that every lyric was an image. That was fun. I wonder what would happen if I took all these jokes I had, like, that I've accumulated over time about what was going on in pop culture, and I just kind of drew them out in sort of a slideshow and added music to it. And then that became something that became an entire chapter of my life. Like, not with the inherent vision of, like, from the moment you do it, it's now going to become this thing.
This was before video editing. This was before Instagram Reels. This was before you could just take the clip and put filters on it and transitions. And
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to say it was in the dark ages, but, you know.
I mean, it was a different time. And it also wasn't the... I would also say, and this is a term that I feel like I've heard a lot from, like, Bill Simmons on the Rewatchables. He talks about the concept of, like, monoculture, right? Mm-hmm. So the idea that you can have counterculture if you have a singular, like, you have a monoculture, where we're all pretty much watching the same TV shows
at that time.
Yeah. We're all going to get the same pop culture references because we're all getting these, we're not siphoned off into these different algorithms, niches, you know, separate echo chambers that are just tailored to our specific interests. There was at one time, back in the early aughts, still this semblance of, like, you know, we're all kind of, we're also in the golden age of content where, you know, like, there wasn't a Netflix
or
streaming
Hulu,
show, all this
Prime,
other stuff, where how many times you watch a TV show and your friend's like, I don't even get that streaming service. So, but anyway, I can't remember how we got to that point. I'm sure it was a lovely journey. I have no idea how I got there.
The viewers are live questioning, messaging, asking us, are you legally able to say what the television show that you worked on?
Yeah, sure. There was a show, at that time, was a show on ABC. It was called Notes from the Underbelly, and
one of my favorites.
Right. And I was Stacey Traub's assistant. Hi, Stacey. She was wonderful.
She was the one that was live messaging in. How'd you know? So, and it's interesting. It's good to get that context because, I mean, it was only 16 years ago, but I mean, it really feels like a lifetime ago. This was also before really podcasts took off. This was before, you know, once again, there were no Instagram stories, there was no Snapchat, and Facebook was really just getting started. So you really were beholden to those shows.
People just had to happen to come upon what you were doing. And if you were trying to build an audience, and I don't even know if I was trying to build an audience, I was just trying to, like, express myself, right?
And be creative.
And I think that even with, like, if we were to pause for a second, like, anything you're seeing behind me, which, like, right now, and we'll touch on this in a second, a lot of this is an area that I feel really comfortable with, which is working with repurposed objects. If I'm not, you know, obviously it does still look fairly, like, I guess the term is, like, naive or, like, innocent art, but repurposed objects is an area I feel really comfortable in. I used to do, like, when I, and we'll get to it in a second, when I used to do, like, had a little series I was doing on YouTube, those things were all in, like, school supplies. They were in neat composition notebooks. It felt both nostalgic, it was easy to get, and it also, a big thing is, like, it wasn't really expensive. I didn't have a ton of money. I was a, you know, broke kid in my 20s, and I didn't, you know, there's a lot, feels a lot more pressure when you're using the top of the top quality something while you're still banging around figuring it out. And I really believe that for me, like, when I first came into the studio, probably back in March, I had just started making things like these little blobs that had googly eyes on them because I did not know how to make eyes. So I was like, we'll solve that problem. And that became the blocks behind you came because one day I happened to like feel brave enough to work in acrylic on canvas, and then I was like, I don't have it in me to continue to buy canvas until I'm good at this. This also feels like a lot of pressure, and I don't like that. I don't like that. It feels very scary. So then the blocks then gave me a framework of like, oh, I like these colors. I'm just going to throw all the other colors aside and just work with these colors because that seems less overwhelming. And that led me into painting with inside books, which led me to ripping them out, which led me into the library used bookstore, which has like just a wealth of like just things to get, things that you just like, I wonder what I could do with this. And those became coffee table books, but inside those books had all these old weird masterpieces, and I was like, I wonder what would happen. I can't draw a body, but I can draw a face, and I could put a weird caption on, like, wonder what these people are doing, I wonder what they're saying, I wonder what this is, and then that has spawned this. But for me, I really feel like, and I can't, obviously it's different for everyone, but for me, and I have no idea where this is going to lead me, is like, I feel like creativity is like somebody handing you like magic beans or like a packet of seeds. And they're like, go plant this. And if you water it and you nurture it every single day, something is going to grow.
Wow.
And every day you go out, if you're lucky, and if you prioritize it or you have the privilege of the time and space and, you know, the support of people who believe in you going out there every day with your watering can and just giving it a little bit, and then it starts to grow. You're like, it's growing, and people are like, what is it? You're like, I don't know. And then it starts to take shape, and then eventually, like, you know, it's like some things where you're like, oh, I think it's a flower, and then you come back a couple days later and you're like, wait a minute, that flower is becoming fruit, right? Like, which is also like the craziest thing in the world, that like fruit all comes from a flower. Like, isn't it the wildest thing in the world?
I didn't know that we were opening gardens here and farms at Zero Empty Spaces.
You're wonderful. Yeah, that's the next iteration of Zero Empty Spaces, is Zero Empty Plots. There you go. No, but I mean, but honestly, like, I think that for me, everything continues to reveal itself and iterate, and I would have never dreamed that this is what I was doing. I have no idea what I'm going to be making 6 months from now. I just hope that if I continue to show up, and continue to ask myself, like, I wonder what would happen if, you know, if you're lucky, it will flow that way. And then sometimes it doesn't, and it's the most painful thing in the world. And you're like, that was the last one I'm ever going to make, and I'm probably a hack, and, you know, whatever. Like, those are the painful moments. They happen all the time, you know?
You're not a hack.
I mean, I don't know.
And it's amazing to see how much your work has progressed just in the last few weeks or months, even since you joined the program, and since the grand opening, and since our last attempt at recording a podcast that failed because of corrupted file, until now. And I really, really love this current iteration of work. But more so than that, and I think the fans are continually live tweeting in and asking questions while we're pre-recording this. I've been fascinated by LA culture and by California culture, and the influences and the things that I'm seeing are so rich and so vivid, at least on the visual art side. Mm-hmm. Could you expand a little bit further upon, from that initial LA experience working as a showrunner, making that first iMovie, experiment, and then some of the experiences that you were a part of, some of the things that you were fortunate enough to start and be a part of in LA, and how that further influence your creativity and transition back to South Florida?
Oh my gosh, I mean, like, 16 years, I feel like there's so many moments.
She's very humble and modest, by the way. She's going to downplay it, but
no, there's so many moments I was fortunate to be a part of. I would say that, look, I spent most of my adult life there, so it's not like I have a ton of experience where somebody could say like, oh, well, you know, Smithtown, USA is just like that. And I would be like, I guess so, I didn't know. But I would say that my personal experience in LA, my personal experience with the people that I was able to work with, be friends with, you know, whatever, associate with, most people I know, especially in my early to mid 20s, everybody had the thing that they might go and do during the day, and then everybody had their side project, their side passion, there's something that they're working on. And I just so the little YouTube series ended up having a name. That name was called Pop Waffle. I cannot say that all those jokes are stellar or good or things that I would make now, but that was like the creative project I was doing at that time. And Pop Waffle, just through the nature of doing something, just through the nature of just like you doing Zero Empty Spaces or anything else, if you consistently do a thing, people then know you as the person who does that thing. And then they're out meeting somebody and they go, hey, you know, you need to meet so-and-so because they, you know, they make pancakes. And that person's like, oh, cool, I make waffles. You guys should meet, right? So you just start to meet people who are out there doing that. It brought in wonderful people into my life, and other random opportunities. For some reason or another, it helped me with like every regular job I ever had in my adult life, because either I met people through something and that led me to that job, that led me to those people, led me to that job, or somebody had gone and looked up at like a digital portfolio before I came in for an interview and they were like, well, I know she's creative, so let's throw her in the fire. So like those things happen. Things I was involved in. Okay, let's see.
Well, one of the ones you talk about meeting people, you mentioned you were part of starting a concept that people were able to read their screenplays or their scripts.
Oh, okay.
Examples like that. Like these
sure.
are super cool to me. I would love to be a part of these experiences.
So let's see. I did a one-off. I had the idea in 2009 to do this goes back to pop culture and connecting people through pop culture. I wanted to do an interactive screening. I had seen things like, do you remember The Room? Do you know, like, there was, like, James Franco was, like, in the, like, theatrical version of The Making of The Room? Okay. So, like, you know Rocky Horror Picture Show?
Sure.
Right, okay. Have you ever seen Mystery Science Theater 3000? It was, like, a show that was on, like, back in the, like, 90s.
You told me about it, yes.
Have I? Oh, okay.
Yes. But you haven't told them about it.
Okay, Mystery Science Theater 3000. It's still on Netflix in its own iterations. It's, like, you know, people watching bad movies and then making jokes about it, and the guy has, like, robots. It's fine. It's great. It's wonderful. They're puppets. They're great. So, The Room was back in, like, 06, 07, it was a midnight screening that would happen at this one theater in LA, similar to Rocky Horror. It was this movie that was deemed as, like, just being awful, and people would come, and it became this cult thing to go, and there were jokes, or people would throw spoons during this one moment. It was just this almost like a Mystery Science Theater 3000 live, which is, like, I love it.
Pretty cool.
I love it. I like a collective experience, like going to a concert and singing along with people. It's a wonderful thing to feel connected to people 100%. By having a shared thing.
100%.
So I said to myself, like, okay, I know all these people who grew up all over the country who love this movie called Troop Beverly Hills. It came out in 1989.
Beverly Hills Cop?
No, Troop Beverly Hills.
I love that movie.
It stars Shelley Long. It's directed by this guy, Jeff Canoe, who also directed Revenge of the Nerds. It stars Jenny Lewis, some of you might know from her own music career. Anyway, so I was like, there should be a way for people to experience this. It was coming up on, like, the 20th anniversary. And I was like, there should be a way for us to celebrate this, but I don't want to. What if it wasn't a free-for-all where people just shouted out whatever they wanted? What if we built in all of these things onto the screen that had facts, that, like, kind of called out locations, that were things that, like, everybody would know what to say in unison? I wonder what that would be like. And I was crazy enough and stupid enough and whatever to just kind of, like, go for it. And the more I just started telling people I was doing it, the more things started to line up, where I was able to, like, someone knew somebody who knew the director. And the director, I went and took him for coffee, and he's like, look, I don't know if anyone's going to show up for this thing. He's like, if you tell me people are going to come, all right, I'll come. And I was like, no, I'm telling you, like, people are, I didn't even have a venue. I was like, yes, please, we have a date, like, it's going to be great. And then I had to, like, you know, I had somebody, you know, I had a boyfriend at the time, like, help me figure out how to, like, put all the stuff underneath. And I had all these girlfriends of mine who would sit there with me and, like, we're going to watch a movie together, and we're going to watch it with all the things that we're baking into this interactive experience. How do you think this feels? How do you think that, like, is it going slow at certain parts, and taking that feedback and then putting it back into the mix. And then the day came and we, like, sold out, and then I went and did it again in New York at a place called the Bell House. It ended up I still have, like, a framed thing. We ended up being mentioned in the approval matrix of New York Magazine, which was, like, for a pop culture geek. Is like,
and these are, like, real venues.
Yeah. And then did it again at 92Y Tribeca, I think once or twice, and then at 6 and I in DC, because people had heard about it, and by that point there was, like, Twitter, and there was, again, like, there was no way to market this other than, like, word of mouth and hoping that somebody at this blog about, you know, like Gothamist or whatever at that time could, like, help get the word out.
09.
Yeah.
2009.
2009, 2010,
Yeah.
2011.
Early stages of social media. It was super cool, and when you shared this with me, I mean, it really struck a chord. And they were really cool amongst many other experiences that you've been a part of that we'd have to have a whole separate podcast series to talk about. But it's in those experiences, in those shared experiences, that really true help form your creativity, your identity, your story, and ultimately, in part, shaped the human being, the artist that you are today here.
I mean, I would say, like, you'd asked about, like, people reading their scripts. That's when I worked as a community builder.
What was the name of that initiative?
The initiative is called New Roots. I was a part of a 2-year fellowship where we built micro communities. And I felt like in a big city, especially knowing what it was like to move to big cities, both at 18 and 23 years old, how overwhelming it can be. And people are moving and relocating to big cities or wherever. All people have life changes. And so that was part of a idea. So I worked as a community builder for a nonprofit. The organization was called New Roots, and their main objective was to help build micro communities and inspire young people in their 20s and 30s, or empower them even to, like, start to really take ownership in like building community themselves, like kind of teaching them and then letting them go run with it. And a lot of the ideas were really, it was a bottom up initiative in the sense that the ideas of what the community needed were all informed through, like, one-on-one conversations with people in the community, and really having our finger on the zeitgeist and the collective and all those things that I love, right, in people, and getting curious about them, which goes, you know, all that stuff that talks about. I said, like, I love documentaries because I'm very curious about the world and people. And so this idea came from someone in the community who was like, I'm a writer, but I'm usually by myself, either at a coffee shop or I'm by myself at home, and I want to hear, if something's working, I want to hear it out loud. I don't want to be in necessarily, like, a competitive environment. I just want to be able to meet other writers and just, like, you know, connect with them and make other connections. And so that spawned this series, and I think it went on for, like, over a year. I think even when I was drawn to the work that nonprofit was doing and the idea of working as a community builder, and this was just a couple years before the pandemic happened, I think what it really illuminated for me, or it really, maybe not even illuminated, I think it just, like, solidified the idea that we can do just about anything as long as we have community. That we really, it's that concept of, like, if I was more comfortable with my neighbors and I knew my neighbors really well, do I need to own a hammer if I'm only using a hammer, like, once or twice a year? If I feel comfortable to ask my neighbor, like, hey, can I borrow a hammer, right? Wow. That idea that, you know, a lot of us are just kind of in our own little bubbles, and maybe we see our friends for lunch or dinner, and then we're off doing our own thing. But like, what does it really mean to have a concept of community? And so what drew me to the idea of Zero Empty Spaces was I had made art in my house. I'd made art all over any apartment I'd had in my 20s. I'd torn apart, my paper and wall, and there'd be, and then I'd clean everything up if I was going to have people over, and then it would all, splur out again. Or, even when I had roommates, it was just like all over my bedroom were like, that's where I made all of those, episodes from YouTube. They were all done out of my bedroom. And that was great, and that was fine. But there's something about leaving your house and coming to a space, and I specifically, it's not just that it says to you, and this goes back to the first thing that we said when we first sat down, it was like, what does it mean to define yourself as an artist? Does it mean having a space? Does this mean I'm legit now because I have a space, even though it's like 88 square feet, right? Or is it just the act of showing up and being present, even if it's for an hour, even if it's for 2 hours? And for me, what keeps me moving is not just like that sense of no matter what came out that day, I showed up for the work. It's also that I'm not doing it in isolation. I'm not going through the pains and the pulling my hair out and the wondering and the not understanding where something is leading me alone. I'm here, before you came, I was sitting on the floor looking at paper samples with another artist in the studio, Jen, who and just having those conversations. And it's not so much that in being able to ask each other these questions and it's interesting, I didn't know how to draw a table, and I walked over to Batya and I was like, is this how you draw a table? But people are just incredibly generous with their experience. It's such a collaborative, supportive, and celebratory environment. Nobody is trying to compete with each other. I don't like competition at all. It stresses me out. It's terrible. I don't like the idea that for someone to win, somebody has to come in second place. That makes me feel terrible.
Same.
It feels terrible. So the idea that you can just create your own thing, and that's also like the beauty of creativity. If you invent, creativity is almost like inventing your own language. And if you're inventing something new, well, then nobody can tell you you're doing it wrong because no one's done it before, and that's beautiful too. So it's been so if I have evolved a lot in the last couple months, I don't have any other, if this was a scientific experiment, the only constant is me. The variable is showing up in a space, and that's what I think has been different. And this work this behind me is busy and loud and ridiculous as my brain is. This is a pretty good representation of being in my brain. That's kind of how we got to where we are.
I appreciate you mentioning that. It's interesting because for some of the artists, having the space allowed them, or getting into the space and having a studio didn't necessarily validate that they were an artist, but then they felt more comfortable saying that they were an artist. Whereas they might have been painting at home for 30 years but never really showed the world their work. And by being amongst peers and contemporaries that end up becoming your studio mates and your friends, even though most of you never knew each other outside of this before that, it's been a very interesting social experiment on our part to see beautiful things unfold, not just the actual artwork, but the collaborations, the idea sharing, the beautiful things that come when you put creatives in spaces together. So I appreciate you sharing that. I would just like to take an opportunity as we get into this current work here. You mentioned school supplies earlier as it related to your YouTube show. You said you wanted to go back to that. So how have school supplies or just the supplies, I guess, that you keep on hand,
yeah.
how are they integrating with your work here or influencing your work here?
So, part of my creative process, and I don't know why this is, but it just seems to be, there's a part of my creative process that is the collecting of materials. And whether it is like scratching the itch of, you know, when you're a kid and you're about to start, you're going to go back to school and you're going back to school shopping and you're going to get like a new folder and a new pencil pouch, and it's like there's like an excitement to that thing if it's like a new thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and like for me, somebody who's 80, like the first day of school everything was immaculate, and then by like semester 1, like everything had been like scribbled on and ruined and broken, and I was out of paper. Like that's just how things were. Like there was just like that's just, and if you were to see the other side of this camera, there's piles of paper everywhere. But that excitement, and maybe this is part of because my work is, or my inner artist is like very childlike, there's a part of that feeling of like the excitement of the possibility, right? Which I think is like that back to school, like there's the nostalgia there. I think that was coming out when I was doing Pop Waffle, and I colored in crayon. My work was has always been like a very DIY vibe that works for me. It gives me permission to be a little rough around the edges. It gives me permission for things that don't have to look perfect. It feels a little subversive. There's something there that seems to work for what I'm trying to express. But there is a part of like I said, like when I was like broke in my 20s, like, okay, well, I can't comprehend going and buying like the nicest, you know, $20 notebook, but I could get 10 of these things at the dollar store, and then if this one doesn't turn out right, I still have 9 more. Or like the idea of like one of these sponges isn't anything, but like if I do 9 of them, then they could be a this, and that's more interesting. So a huge tenet of the things I create is also like very much that thing of like it's 11 o'clock the night before your book report is due, and you've got to put together a diorama with what's around the house because your mom isn't going to go take you to Walgreens, right? Like what are you going to make of what you have? And sometimes just by looking at the world around you differently, you realize you already have a lot of what you need in order to make art. It's removing that barrier to entry of like what you need to make art. And as I've continued to iterate just here in the studio, I'm buying the slightly nicer acrylic. But initially, I'm using like Crayola watercolor paints, or I'm using like I said before, the idea of like just buying 100 canvases and sitting there going, oh my god, I'm gonna have to probably do 100 of these before I start to figure out what the heck I'm doing here. But if I go and look at a book, well, this is 100 pages right here. That's 100 tries at trying to go at something and showing up and seeing what is revealed as I keep showing up to do the work. That's lower stakes. That is more freedom. That is more chances to try without it feeling like the pressure of having invested in all of these tools. So that's a big thing for me. But it also, I think, like, for whatever reason, there's nothing really particularly interesting about the work. It's like the context with which it's in. I don't think there's anything really like spectacular about this bird, but I was like, oh, I can draw that again and again, and I have this thing to say, so I'm going to make him say it. So cool. So that's where some of this, but anyway, a huge part of like what I've done when I used to make puppets out of repurposed objects. Again, like 99-cent store, what's around, you know, what do you have that like you can just, if you have 10 of them, now it's like a beautiful background, you know. That's
I really appreciate you sharing that, and I think this will resonate not just with adult artists, but also with their kids, or maybe a lot of people feel like they have to conform to a certain way of doing things, and you do have to use the level 3 canvas from, you know, Michael's to make proper artwork. You do have to buy, you know, a certain grade level acrylic paint, but, you know, that presents a barrier of entry for a lot of people to making art. So the way that you kind of correlate it by taking the items around you and repurposing them or using them as part of your creativity is a lot more freeing, and it takes a lot of that pressure off, because you can blow through, as you know, a lot of money in art supplies.
Well, it's not just that. It's also like sometimes it's an opportunity to be clever, right?
Very, very clever.
So if you look at something, you're like, well, I wouldn't even know where to begin to do that. But if I it's almost like impressionist in the sense that, did you know that I was trying to draw a bird? Okay, well then what difference does it make? It's a bird then, fine. And if not, like, that's okay too. I think that, I guess it has always been like an opportunity to, like, I may never have the patience or the precision. I really have a very difficult time with being precise in how I'm drawing. So I have to work within the confines of what I have. And if I had to be absolutely perfect with my lines, I would, like, literally, for whatever reason, I'm one of those people where, like, if somebody's watching, you have to, like, nail it on that take. That's when I crumble under that. Like, if you're like, it's fine to make a mistake, it's fine, I'd be like, it's a perfect straight line. But if you're like, it has to be a perfect straight line, I'm like, oh, it didn't do it. So I just feel like there is, a lot of it is about freedom. A lot of making creative things or having creative expression for me is about finding that sense of play and honoring your, as hokey as this may sound to some people, it's honoring that inner child. Like, and for all of us, we have that, and it doesn't necessarily show up in the exact same way. I didn't paint as a child. I went upstairs and made dances. Like, that was the world I explored as a young person. But I think that everybody has something within them that they can lose themselves. They can lose themselves and lose, like, the constraints of the adult world. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing it for a productive reason, like, I'm running so that I can be healthy and have a good... No, it's like, I'm running because it feels good to go fast. Or it's like, I'm writing and not writing because I have to now figure out how to monetize this. I'm writing because this is what the inner child in me wants to do. I think that there is something really radical and revolutionary about maintaining that part of yourself, because there's profit to be made in people not in, like, there's profit made in the conforming to society's expectations of, like, what it means to be an adult and what it means to want to feel free. Cool, you can go buy a ticket to this experience so you can go feel free, or you can just, like,
be free in your mind.
I don't know.
Amen. I think that was the biggest takeaway, and I appreciate you sharing that. And I really do think that could really impact somebody's life who's sitting there listening. And there are so many societal pressures. There are so many, like, oh, I'm not good enough. Oh, I don't do this. Oh, I don't do that. Oh, I don't look like this. Right, exactly.
Nobody cares. Like, I feel like, the most beautiful thing is somebody showing up in this world authentically, unless who they authentically are is a jerk, but, like, whatever. But, like, even then, at least if that's your authentic self, great. But I think that any creative project I've done, whether it's, like, collaborative choreography, dance classes, whether it's being on a dance squad, all these things, I think that, I hope that somebody walks up to my stuff and goes, I could do that. Good. Go home and do it. The world will be better. You'll be happier for it. Go do it. And maybe you'll meet other people on the way who want to go who are vibing with whatever you're doing.
100%.
Good. I hope that this lowered the bar for expectations. Good. I hope you're not impressed. I'm not. Like, you know what I'm saying? I don't, I don't know where ideas come from. I don't know why they come. I'm happy when they show up. I feel like, it's a better use of my creative energy to do it.
The best use.
But, good. And nobody cares. The idea that things need to be perfect is awful.
Very well put. There are no perfect people, but we would like to show them a little bit of your creative world.
Okay.
I'm going to take the camera, pan around here. Let's show them some of your recent works here.
Awesome.
So why don't you show us a little bit of your recent works in your studio here?
Cool. So I think this may have been the first one. These are all from books that I purchased at the Friends of the Boca Raton Library. So all of this supports the Boca Raton Library. So shout out to them for having such high quality books. And a lot of them come from like the life and times of like famous figures like Queen Elizabeth and whatever. And so yeah, I think this is the first one I did, and I just started drawing on top of it. I think actually, I think my friend Alina inspired some of these. But anyway, then I started adding text to them and giving them little stories, which I think a lot of us do when we go like to a museum when we're looking at fine art from another era, and we make up our own little caption as to what's going on there, like, which, you know, I guess ties back to like Mystery Science Theater 3000 of like putting something else on something else and giving a different context. I'm working right now on making these into prints and other kinds of merch. So some of them are now scanned in, and they'll either be things like shirts or pencil pouches or iPhone cases or whatever.
Wow.
This was the original idea for them, which was just the idea of a coffee table book, because that made me laugh. That was funny to me that would be on someone's coffee table instead of like some super schmancy, let me impress my guests type book. These are, you know, sometimes little things I've said or little musings I've had, I'll end up on. These are all from pieces of paper. I think these are from a Suzanne Summers book that like I found in my parents' house. I don't know why they had it, but it's mine now. It's mine now, and it's for art. And so yeah, I start by just using, you know, some of the colors that I've kind of decided are part of this series, and I make the faces that I'm physically able to make, and then I'll come back later and say, like, I wonder what she's really saying here. Now this lady, if I was wearing that, I'd be schwitzing like crazy in something that ornate, you know, or, you know, what are these people trying to say, or like what can I take from the collective as part of the conversations we're all having, and layer that on top of something that is also incredibly old and from another time and era. And
I think it's a fantastic use of.
So, and I don't know, and I think that, you know, I hope the people who these are portraits of are like fine with me putting a new face on this, but then I remind myself that like somebody donated these books. They were getting rid of them anyway, so they might as well become something new and colorful and silly and whimsical. People tell me that my art is whimsical or happy. I'm not happy or whimsical all the time, but I like that is what chooses to come out as part of my creative process, and that if it does bring joy to somebody else, then that's the best honor in the world. It's the best use of these paints in the world. But
if they want to see more of your creative process and follow you on the social medias, where can they find you?
Sure. So my handle is @thiserikalife, ERIKA. It was once a play on the NPR show This American Life, but no one got that. It was just me getting my own references as usual. But yeah, that's where you can see things and find out more.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you taking the time to share your creativity with us. And if you'd like to tour Erika's studio along with 20 or maybe 19 other artists, we're here at the Boca Raton Innovation Campus, the former IBM headquarters. And they're open every single day here. Here's part of the glory stuff.
No.
Oh my God. And we certainly would encourage you to reach out, schedule a studio tour, bring your group by, bring your friends, tell a friend to tell a friend, all that good stuff. Any questions, feel free to reach out, info@zeroemptyspaces.com or This Erika Life. And we look forward to seeing you in the studio or tuning into the next podcast. Cheers.